There's a particular kind of regret that belongs to the category of being correctly warned. Where someone who cared about you saw what was coming, said so clearly, and you heard them and dismissed them and walked directly into what they'd described. That regret has a specific quality, not just the regret of the thing itself, but the added weight of the person who tried to help you, who you failed to trust. My father tried to tell me. He was not a man who said a lot. That's an important piece of context. He processed privately and communicated sparsely, and his preference was to let people arrive at their own conclusions rather than to steer them. Which means that when he said something directly, when he departed from that preference and named something explicitly, it carried weight. He reserved that kind of speech for things he felt strongly about. He said, about the career path I was pursuing at 27, I think you're going too fast in a direction that isn't yours. That's the sentence. I've carried it for 15 years. Not because it haunted me at the time I dismissed it, politely and internally, with the efficient certainty of someone who is sure they know better. It haunts me now because it was precisely accurate, and because I had the chance to learn from it before the cost arrived, and I didn't take the chance. The career path was financial consulting. I'd fallen into it from a different direction, taken to it competently, been rewarded for the competence in ways that reinforced the path without ever asking me whether the path was mine. My father had watched this for 3 years and had one evening said, quietly, what he'd apparently been thinking. I said, I know what I'm doing, Dad. He said, I'm sure you do. I just want you to know what I see. I took it as concern from someone who didn't fully understand my world. He was a teacher, I was in finance. He didn't have the context. His read was probably shaped by his own relationship to that kind of work, which was skeptical. What I didn't do was take his observation seriously as data. Sit with it. Ask myself whether there was something in what he'd said that corresponded to something I actually knew but wasn't acknowledging. If I'd done that, if I'd given his words the consideration they deserved, I think I would have found something real. I think I would have recognized that I'd been pursuing the path on the logic of competence rather than the logic of fit. That I was good at the work but not, at any deep level, interested in it. That the rewards were real but were rewarding a version of me that wasn't the most alive version. I didn't do that. I kept going. 5 years later I left the field. The leaving was harder, more expensive, and more disruptive than it would have been at 27. The rebuilding took 3 years. The career I have now, the work I actually find meaningful, was available to me in some form at 27. I just hadn't been willing to look at it yet. My father never said I told you. He is not that kind of person. When the transition happened, he was supportive and present and asked practical questions about how I was navigating it. He did not extract any satisfaction from having been right. I extracted it for him, privately, in my own accounting of the situation. And in extracting it I asked the question that still sits with me, why hadn't I listened? The answer I've arrived at is, because I wasn't ready. Because at 27 I didn't have the capacity to hear that I was going in the wrong direction without also hearing that I'd been wasting my time, that the years in the field were a mistake rather than a route that had eventually pointed me somewhere better. I couldn't separate the two. Admitting he was right felt, at 27, like admitting that everything I'd built up to that point was wrong. It wasn't wrong. It was on its way to somewhere. But I couldn't see that at the time, and so the wisdom arrived, and I didn't have the container for it, and I went on. The lesson I've tried to draw from this isn't always listen to your parents. That's too simple and sometimes wrong. The lesson is more specific. When someone who loves you and has watched you carefully says something uncomfortable about a direction you're heading, it deserves more than a polite dismissal. It deserves genuine examination. Not because they're certainly right, they're not always right, but because they're seeing from outside your story, and outside your story is exactly the perspective that's hardest to obtain for yourself. I should have said, tell me more about what you see. I should have sat with it. Asked questions. Let it in enough to examine it honestly. I didn't learn in time. I learned later, in a harder way, at a higher cost. But I did learn. And the learning shapes how I listen now. When someone I trust says, "I think you're going in the wrong direction," I stop. I ask what they see. And I actually listen to the answer. Here's what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.